Hey all, this is Ratatoskr. Today we're going to be doing a Q&A to celebrate the channel reaching 150,000 subscribers. The video will be unscripted and mostly without editing. And to save some time, it will also count for today's countdown video leading up to Shadow of the Erdtree, meaning that the stuff I talk about here will be spoiler-free. Let's jump right in. Question number 1. What drew you to analyzing the themes of From Software games? And do I have a history in writing or a major in philosophy or something? And as for the second part of that question, I don't have a formal education in philosophy or literature. I just read a lot when I was a teenager, and among the many things that I read were philosophy books, a lot of them. But as to why I became interested in making videos about From Software games, it was because, well, I suppose it's the same reason why anybody makes a lore video in any of these games. It's because we're arrogant enough to think that we're right, and that we have a perspective valuable enough to share. And so before the release of Elden Ring, I eventually put out a video explaining what I thought Dark Souls was about, what it was trying to say. And to this day, I think that's one of my favorite videos, if not my favorite video. It is the one I'm the most proud of. I stand by it, I think I'm totally right, and I encourage anybody that hasn't seen it to check it out. Next question says, what's your hierarchy for types of in-game evidence for theories? Item descriptions versus NPC dialogue versus environmental architectural evidence, for example, how much weight do you give each of them? That's a great question. I believe that item descriptions are the highest tier of evidence, and in almost every circumstance, we should take them at face value. That doesn't mean that we have to always take them at face value, but we need a reason to not believe them. I don't believe it's appropriate to just consider them hearsay or dogmatic teachings of the Golden Order. I think that we should assume that they are telling the truth unless we can find contradictory evidence elsewhere, significant contradictory evidence. And I believe that's really the only way to go forward. If we don't trust the item descriptions, then we can't do any lore about anything ever. Everything becomes suspect, and the lore is in a worse mess than it is currently. For NPC dialogue, it stands at a tier lower than the item descriptions, because a character telling you something is not necessarily communicating that the thing is true. The game could just be trying to communicate that the thing is believed by that character or whatever group of characters that person is associated with. Or the game could be trying to hint that the person is lying. For example, when Roger tells you in Elden Ring that the assassins that took part in the Night of the Black Knives are scions of the Eternal City, I don't think that necessarily means that they are scions of the Eternal City. Maybe they are. But what that's communicating to you is that it is believed by him and maybe by other people. I don't think that he's lying. But the evidence is not as convincing as if it had been said directly in an item description. Now, in a similar position to character dialogue, I think are item descriptions that have "it is said" as a preface. So for example, the Black Knife Assassin armor. This is a really great item to use as an example. It has two parts. The first part just tells you something, and then the second part tells you a rumor about something. So, the first part tells you that the Black Knife Assassins were all women. It doesn't say that it's a rumor, it doesn't preface it with "it is said," it just tells you they're all women, which I think we should view that as a fact. The second part tells you that it is rumored that they have close ties to Queen America and that they're all Newman. That second part is communicating to the reader that there are rumors surrounding this event. It is rumored that people believe that. There are certain people that think that that's the case. That doesn't guarantee that the Black Knife Assassins were Newman or that they were connected, but it does guarantee that people believe it. So in a way, it's telling you another fact. Fact number 1, they're all women. Fact number 2, some people believe that they are connected to Queen America and that they're Newman. So as for item descriptions that have the "it is said" preface, we should consider them to be evidence of what they're saying, but not great evidence. It doesn't have the quality of evidence as an item description that just tells you something. But you also can't use it to disprove what it's saying. Not every time you see an item description that says "it is said" does that give you leave to discount the next sentence that it's saying. The value of the evidence is lessened, but it's not zero, and it's definitely not negative. It's not evidence that cuts in the other direction. It's fine to be skeptical about "it is said" statements, but you need other evidence apart from just the fact that the statement is there to question its veracity. Alright, Next question. Do you think that the worlds of Soulsborne games are connected in any way? The problem with this question is that there would be no way to prove it in either direction. Any evidence that you bring to bear in favor of the worlds being connected can be hand-waved away as a simple reference. So even if it was true that they are connected in Miyazaki's mind, he has some way in his brain that he thinks they're all related to each other. It wouldn't do any good to argue about it, because there's no type or amount of evidence that people would accept, other than Miyazaki directly saying so. There are some thematic similarities. There are things about the games that are identical that wouldn't necessarily have had to have been. For example, in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, souls work pretty much in the exact same way. In Demon Souls, it's revealed that souls are the things that let you differentiate between one thing and another thing. That's why in the opening cutscene it says that soul gives you clarity. It lets you see. That's why when a land is devoid of souls, it gets covered in colorless gray fog. Because in an area without souls, everything is, it's covered in a fog. You can't differentiate between things. And in Dark Souls, souls work in an almost identical way. It's what gives you clarity, it's what keeps you from going insane. Crystals might work the same way in Dark Souls 1 and in Elden Ring. There's a lore bit about how crystals and souls are connected in a deep way. And magic and crystals are connected. And in Elden Ring, of course, the crystallians and glintstone, the fact that they're crystals, they seem to be connected together as well. It's not obvious to me because I never really understood what the exact connection between souls and crystals were. But whatever concept was being used in Dark Souls 1 might be used again in Elden Ring. We just don't know what it is. There's also the fact that dragons in Elden Ring have stone scales, and it is thought that that's the source of their immortality, which is, of course, similar to the dragons in Dark Souls 1. And those aren't the only things. There's lots and lots of stuff like that. And then there's an interview with Miyazaki about Dark Souls 1, where he was asked if it was connected to Demon Souls, and Miyazaki responded, "I would be yelled at if I didn't say no." Which is a joke, probably. And then the interviewer says, there are some people that hint at, and then Miyazaki responds, "It must be a coincidence? No, really, there's no connection, no real connection." And then the interviewer is like, "The more you keep explaining it, the more it sounds like you're lying." So he's making a joke, but it also could be that he just can't connect them. Demon Souls isn't owned by Fromsoft. Even if he personally intended for them to be connected, it probably wouldn't be practical or advisable for him to say. So I don't know if they're connected, but it's not the type of thing I would argue for or against. Next question is, what's my biggest hopes and copes for Monster Hunter Wild? Well, I'm not really in the headspace for hopes and copes yet for Monster Hunter Wilds. For me, the marketing cycle hasn't really ramped up to the degree that would get me super excited. I am excited in a distant way. I'm sure I'll enjoy it. I'm sure it'll be great. But I don't really have the capability of caring for more than one thing at a time. I'm a very focused person, and at the moment, really, the only big thing I can worry about is Shadow of the Erdtree, which I'm sure will keep me well fed for a while. I don't actually think there's anything to worry about, though, in terms of Monster Hunter Wilds. I would be surprised if it's anything less than fantastic. And I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say once I start to care more, once this Shadow of the Erdtree stuff slows down. Next question is, what do I do for a living? What I do for a living is just YouTube. I used to work, but I am now full-time YouTube. Next question is, your connection between the Flame of Chaos and the Brothers Karamazov was great. Would you ever consider including a book or other media reviews in this channel? Thank you. I didn't know how that was going to turn out when I did that video. I would love to do more readings for books. I enjoyed doing that for the Brothers Karamazov, but it's hard to find ways to connect them to it. So if I did that, I would just have to do a reading for no reason. I would just have to find a book that I can read, a passage that I find particularly good, and that would just be the video, the whole point of the video, which I wouldn't mind, but it's not exactly on brand for my channel. Maybe I'll try it one day and see what happens. Next question is, what is your favorite item of lore, and why is it your favorite? I think in Elden Ring, my favorite lore is that the Vulgar Militia stuff, they don't really have much of anything. The only piece of lore about them is that everyone in the Lands Between hates them, and they hate them because they're short. And that's it. That's their only thing. It doesn't say that there's another reason, it's just that they're short, and their shortness makes them worthy of contempt, which I think is very funny and true. Next question is the fact that you often ask us to unsubscribe and leave a bad comment detrimental to your channel? Well, I've never asked people to subscribe and leave a nice comment, so I wouldn't know what to compare it to. I have to assume that it's not too detrimental to the channel since we are here celebrating a pretty big milestone at 150,000 subscribers. Next one is gun to your head and you gotta say, yes, we fight Miquella, or no, we don't fight Miquella. What is your answer and why? If I have a gun to my head and my life depends on it and I have to make an assumption based on very little evidence, I would say we do fight Miquella. And the only reason I think that is because in the story trailer that we saw, you hear a song at the very end that we haven't heard before. So it's one of the DLC songs. And the way that it sounds is how I would picture a boss fight song for Miquella to go. It's very suitable for Miquella. Now, if I didn't have a gun to my head, then what I would answer is that I don't know. I don't know. Now, these series of questions I'm going to take as one question. I'm asked, what's my favorite armor combo? What's my favorite weapon for PvP and PvE? And that would be the Carrion Knight armor and the Carrion Knight sword. I think this armor and this weapon is the nicest looking. I like how it pairs with the Carrion sword sorceries. My biggest hope for the DLCs is that I get some more Carrion sword sorceries, even though, like, they're really good as they are. I don't actually know what I would want. But for the other question as to what I would design a weapon as, its lore, its stats, its aesthetic, here's what I want. From the previews, I know for a fact that there's a sword that looks identical to the Troll Knight sword. That's the Carrion Troll sword. So the DLC has another sword just like that, looks exactly like it, but the difference is that it has a different Ash of War. The Troll's Knight sword has the unfortunate Ash of War Troll's Roar, which is not what it should have. The DLC adds a new Ash of War for it that's the same as the spell Great Blade Phalanx. So my fondest hope for the DLC is that I get something exactly like that situation for the Carrion Knight sword. If they do it for the Troll sword, they should do it for the Carrion Knight sword too. Here's the problem with the Carrion Knight sword. It's terrible, even though I like it. Its scaling is awful. Even at level 10, it has a D scaling for intelligence, and its Ash of War is based on intelligence. You would have a stronger sword for a Mage Knight if you just took a normal longsword, infused it with magic, and used that, and slapped the Carrion Grandeur Ash of War onto it. It's just like it's a truly awful weapon. So what I would like for them to do is to give it the same treatment that they did to the Troll Knight sword. I would like them to, this new version, have a different scaling, better for magic, and give it a new unique Ash of War called Carrion Grandest, where it charges up the Carrion Greatsword even further, and make it a unique Ash of War stuck only to this weapon. That's what I want. That's my fondest hope. Next question is, will holy damage finally be useful in the DLC? And the answer to that, I think, is yes. In the base game, many enemies, most enemies, have resistance to holy damage. And I'm assuming that the reason for that is because most of the things in the base game are wholly aligned. You know, you live in the lands between, the land, bathed in the Erd Tree's light. But the Land of Shadows is the opposite. So I think that holy damage is probably going to be the best kind of damage for the Land of Shadows. I think that the people that were disappointed on how many enemies have holy resistance are going to have a good time in the DLC. Next question is, how important is customizable characters to you in Souls games comparing Sekiro to Dark Souls? That's an interesting question. So what I'm assuming you're talking about is how in Sekiro you're stuck with one weapon, you're playing as a pre-established character, whereas in Dark Souls you can play however you want, and there's tons of different weapons you can use and tons of different builds that you can try out, and, there's a big difference between them. As to what I prefer, that's a tough question, because they both have their advantages. When you have a game like Dark Souls, when there's tons and tons of different varieties and build-making potential, there are more options when you get stuck on something or when you get bored of something. There are more things you can do, and you can go back through the very many spells and weapons that you have found and decide on the fly, I have this larval tier, let me go respec my character and try something completely different than what I've been doing up until this point. And the game can change dramatically for you if you do that. And it's not just about overcoming challenges, it's also about role-playing how you like. You can be a thief-like character, you can be a paladin, you can be a warrior, a mage, or a combination of a lot of different things. And you can't underestimate the appeal of that. That's something that people really like. But there's also something to be said about games like Sekiro, where you're an established character that fights in a certain way, because for a game like that, you can balance things easier. Going through Sekiro is a more focused experience. And as a result, the combat can be refined and its essence teased out over the course of the game. At the time I was playing Sekiro, I think that I thought Sekiro was the most fun I ever had in any From Software game, and it probably is the case. The action of Sekiro I found very engaging. But it's also true that for me, Sekiro has a lot less replayability. I could go back potentially to Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls 1 or Elden Ring and make a new build and enjoy myself. But I couldn't really do that with Sekiro. There's only so much you can do differently. You can experiment with tools maybe that you didn't use before and some tactics that you didn't think of before. But compared to the breadth of different things that you can try in Elden Ring, it's a quite small pool. So for me, when I finished Sekiro and finished all of the different storylines, I was pretty much just done with it. I don't think I can go back to it and just play it. At least not for a very long time. Next question is, would you rather have Bloodborne 2 or Sekiro 2? That's a toughie. The problem is I would want both. Or rather, not necessarily Sekiro 2 or Bloodborne 2. What I would like is... Well, first of all, let me just say Bloodborne 2. We'll stick to that. I would rather have Bloodborne 2 than Sekiro 2, but I would eventually also want Sekiro 2, if that was an option. But what I'm saying isn't necessarily that I want Bloodborne 2, exactly. Like, I don't necessarily need it to be set in Yharnam, or have any relation to Bloodborne at all. What I want is Sekiro's dodge, and gun parry, and aesthetic. I feel that Bloodborne is different enough from the other Souls games that its appeal is different. And it hurts me to consider that Miyazaki may just never want to make another one. Like, no, it's not the same. It's not the same. And the same thing for Sekiro. Okay, I get that they don't like doing sequels, I get that they don't want to do the same game twice, but I don't like the idea of never having From Software experiment with the Sekiro gameplay that they innovated. You have tons of video games now that copy many of their elements. You have something like Lies of P that was deeply inspired by Sekiro's way of being and Bloodborne's way of being. Bloodborne's aesthetic, Sekiro's parry mechanics, something from the rally mechanic from Bloodborne. A lot of things mixed together to make something good. I cannot believe the idea that we just have to accept, no more Bloodborne aesthetic, no more gun parry, no more tempo of the fights for Bloodborne or for Sekiro. No, we're just going to keep doing new things. No. No, I'm fine if it has nothing to do with Sekiro. I'm fine if it has nothing to do with anything. But you can't just abandon the gameplay aspects of it. Make a whole new IP if you have to, in a land unrelated to Bloodborne or Sekiro, but go back to the way that you did with Elden Ring. The way that you did with Elden Ring. Elden Ring's gameplay is very similar to Souls gameplay. You didn't just abandon it, you made a new IP with similar gameplay. Do the same thing for Bloodborne and for Sekiro if you have to. Or make Bloodborne and Sekiro 2, I don't care. I don't care, one or the other. Next question. Do you read any books, and what are some of your favorites? I do read. I just, I don't read as much as I used to. And I don't actually read like I listen to audiobooks these days. I typically read either older books, classical books, or science books, nonfiction. If you're asking what I'm reading right now, I am going through Pride and Prejudice, which I have never read before, and I'm enjoying it. It's pretty good. Next thing is congrats, I forgive you for neglecting to mention that there were microtransactions in Dragon's Dogma 2. Well, thank you. That's not a question, but thank you. But I guess I'll comment on that. So the first thing is that I'm not sorry, and I apologize to no one. And having said that, I'll explain what this is referring to. I got to review Dragon's Dogma 2 early. Capcom gave me a copy. And it's the earliest I've ever gotten to review something, like 2 weeks in advance. And they gave me a little press kit that told me that they were going to be microtransactions on release day. And I looked at that, and I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't mention it in my review. And that turned into a big controversy, not just for me, for all of the reviewers. Apparently almost nobody mentioned it or didn't mention it. And so accusations were like slung everywhere that, people were being paid by Gamcom to keep it under wraps or something like that, or that they weren't told or whatever. But for me, I just didn't think it was a big deal. And while they did say in an email that they would be there, I didn't have access to them while I was playing. And so I didn't think it would be appropriate to put them in my review, because I didn't have them. I can't review something I didn't have. So then and now, I didn't understand why this was blowing up to be such a big deal. And I still don't think it's a big deal, so I don't apologize and I'm not sorry. Next question. Your last thumbnail made a lot of Coomers come out of the woodwork. Say it ain't so that you're not a Coomer. That is my question, thank you. Well, thank you for your question. I got that image from Twitter a few years ago, and I used it in a thumbnail for Elden Ring. And the reason I used it is because the text of the thing talks about vigor, and I thought it was funny. It's a funny image. The image that I saw was cropped up similar to the image that's on the thumbnail. And apart from this one picture, I've never seen the artist that people are referencing. So if people are coming to my comments and like, I know that image, well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you shouldn't know the image. Certainly not my fault that you know where that image comes from. What's the dumbest question someone's ever asked you? Let me go check my comments and see if there was one that was particularly bad. Alright, this is probably the worst one. I made a video a long time ago, back 2 years ago, during Elden Ring's release, where I talked about Morgott and Margit being the same person and all the evidence that they were the same person. And Margit, I made a throwaway comment about Margit fighting Radahn, and there's this image in the opening cutscene where Margit's like right on top of him. And so someone objected to that in the comment, telling me that I should wait for confirmation. And I'm like, what do you mean wait for confirmation? It's a lore video. Who's going to confirm that that is or isn't Radahn? And he just went on and on about how my assumptions are harming the lore community, and that me being stubborn is the reason that he unsubbed. And normally I wouldn't think much of it. This was a not important interaction. But then he started going to Twitter and Reddit and posting things about it there. And just, it stayed in my memory because it's such a weird thing to get hung up on and to fight so strongly about when you're clearly wrong. That is obviously Radahn. Now, actually, I think I've lost track of what the original question was asking. They asked me what was the stupidest thing. I don't think this was the stupidest thing. I just think that this was the weirdest. But it'll have to do for an answer. Next question. I liked your video on Shin Megami Tensei 5. Are you planning on doing any more videos on the series? I'll probably do a review on Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. I did not really like Shin Megami Tensei 5, and my distaste for it is probably exclusively due to the story. I thought the story was really bad, even though the premise was pretty good, which is the reason I made my video on it in the first place. Good premise, bad story. Bad story. Even though I enjoyed the gameplay and I enjoyed some of the exploration, I enjoyed a lot about it, the story really just ruins it. It really just ruins it. So I'm happy that Vengeance is coming out and changing specifically the thing that I found most objectionable, the story. And I would at least like to finish it before Elden Ring comes out. And even if it's not a proper full review, I can tell people whether or not the story is improved, because I'm sure everything else is also improved. They're not going to ruin the gameplay all of a sudden. Next question. What are some critically acclaimed games you just don't like for whatever reason? Well, let's make people angry. I don't like a lot of critically acclaimed games. Okay, I don't like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I think that its character interactions are very good. I like seeing Cloud and Tifa and Aerith interacting with each other and Barrett. I like all of that. I think the gameplay is really good. I have not heard a single person say anything other than stellar praise for its gameplay. But I just can't tolerate the story, especially the ending. I don't like the ending. I went into Remake with, at the end of it, I was like, well, let's give it a shot. Let's see where they're going. Let's see what they're doing. And now I don't like what they're doing. I don't like where they're going. I won't be buying the third game. Wherever it is that they're heading with the story, they can head there without me. I also didn't like the latest Final Fantasy XVI. They got me with the demo. I actually had a video up in my channel talking about how good the demo was and my hopes for the series. And then I got to play the game, and I just didn't like it. I didn't like the gameplay or the story, or really, I didn't like anything. Didn't like anything about it. It seems like I'm not really a Final Fantasy fan. What I am is a fan of Final Fantasy X, 9, 7, and 6. So if I ever considered myself a card-carrying member of the series, of fandom, I no longer do. I return my card. I don't plan on criticizing it anymore or making videos on it. I return my card, go your own way, leave me out of it. Next question, will you be talking about Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks? Tears of the Kingdom was a disappointment, but maybe this book will help give it some lore. I did hear about the Masterworks. I'm not getting it. I actually have a lot of those books here on my bookshelf. But no, I'm not getting it, and I am not doing content on it. To be clear, I didn't think Tears of the Kingdom was a bad game. I enjoyed it a lot. I just felt it was very disappointing in a lot of ways. I'm waiting for the next Zelda game to get announced, and hopefully, when we see it, even if they keep their open world formula, they'll give me a better story, more linear, traditionally told story, and a actual dungeon, or several. Not the crude imitations that we had in Tears of the Kingdom or in Breath of the Wild. And if they give me that, I don't care what else they do. Next question, why is my name Ratatoskr? I've answered this, I'm sure, a lot, but there's a lot of new people here, so I'll answer it again. It's because Ratatoskr is a Norse mythological squirrel that goes up and down the world tree, and he goes up to the top of the tree, and he gossips with the eagle, and then he goes down to the bottom of the tree, and he gossips with the dragon, and he gets them angry at each other and riles them up. And I like this idea of this squirrel going up and down and, lying and telling them how they called each other's mother's names. And I also liked the idea of the world tree traversal. The world tree is connected to all the worlds. And so since Ratatoskr can go up and down the tree, he could, go to any world, which I felt was a good symbol for being able to go and talk about a lot of different games. All right, I feel myself starting to lose my voice. So I think this might be the last one I answer. What is the one thing that you feel games need to do correctly to be a good game? Of course, it is a scale, and you can't have one without 15 other variables holding it up, but if everything about the game is good besides this one thing, it ruins it, or if everything is bad and this one thing is good, it makes a game tolerable. Oh, that's easy. That's easy. And I'm sure many won't agree with me, but for me personally, the most important thing is the game's story. I need to care about the reasons why my character is doing what he's doing, or I'm likely to drop the game. And the story is important enough that I will tolerate bad gameplay for really long periods of time if I find what's going on in the narrative compelling. A really great example of this is JRPGs. I've played a lot of them, but surprisingly, I don't think that the gameplay for almost any of them is super good. In fact, most of the time, I'm just kind of tolerating the gameplay so I can see what's going on in the story. I know not everyone shares this sentiment, but for me, I'll quickly lose interest in a game, even if I'm having fun playing it, if it doesn't deliver sufficient quality story every once in a while. Alright, I think that's going to be it for now. I don't want to damage my voice. Thank you for your help in getting to 150,000 subscribers, and thank you very much for listening.